Okay, so you want to own a toll bridge. Build a bridge, charge everyone who crosses it, and collect guaranteed income for the rest of your life, decade after decade, without ever having to sell a single product to a single customer. Here's the problem. A toll bridge is not really in the business of moving cars across water. It is in the business of selling a multi-decade bet on traffic that hasn't happened yet. And most of those bets are made by people who won't be around to find out if they were right. Let's start with the fact that there isn't just one kind of toll crossing. A public bridge like the Golden Gate is run by a public agency with no shareholders, and every dollar of toll goes straight into maintenance and debt, never into profit. A private concession is a completely different animal. A public bridge or highway leased out to a private operator for 35, 75, even 99 years in exchange for one enormous upfront payment. A toll tunnel operates on the same public model as a public bridge, just underground instead of over water. And a dynamic toll express lane is something else entirely. A single extra lane bolted onto an existing free highway, repriced every 15 minutes based on how much traffic wants to use it. Four completely different businesses, and only one of them is actually built to generate profit for an owner. Here's where the naive mental model starts to break down. You think the expensive part is pouring the concrete? The Golden Gate Bridge cost $35 million to build in 1937. The Verrazano Narrows Bridge in New York cost $325 million in 1964. The Mackinac Bridge in Michigan cost just over $70 million in 1957. Even accounting for inflation, actually building a bridge from scratch is, relatively speaking, the cheap part. The expensive part is buying the right to collect tolls on one that already exists. In 2005, the city of Chicago didn't sell the physical Skyway, a bridge and highway that had already been standing since 1958. It sold the right to collect tolls on it for the next 99 years for $1.83 billion. In 2006, Indiana did the same thing with its toll road, a highway built in 1956, leasing away 75 years of toll rights for $3.8 billion. Neither of those numbers has anything to do with the cost of concrete and steel. They're both a bet on decades of future traffic, priced and paid for today. Here's the part almost nobody budgets for correctly. Seismic retrofitting. The Golden Gate Bridge's earthquake retrofit program, running since the late 1990s, has already passed $1.8 billion total against an original estimate of just $880 million. Its final phase alone, starting in 2026 and running for 10 years, costs $879 million by itself, on a bridge that only cost $35 million to build in the first place. Every public bridge in America also carries a federally mandated structural inspection every 24 months for its entire operating life. And then there's the cost of collecting the toll itself. In legacy cash and booth systems, collection alone can eat up 20 to 30% of total toll revenue. Fully electronic tolling, the kind most modern systems now run, cuts that collection cost down to around 5% of revenue, which is exactly why almost every toll authority in the country has spent the last decade tearing out booths. And because most of these projects are financed through toll revenue bonds, debt backed only by future toll income and nothing else, the interest rate on that debt runs higher than ordinary government borrowing, precisely because lenders know the whole repayment plan depends on traffic that hasn't shown up yet. So how does a toll crossing actually make its money once it's open? The Golden Gate Bridge, a public nonprofit crossing, still gives a clean picture of the raw mechanics. In its most recent fiscal year, it recorded 33.76 million crossings and $161.1 million in toll revenue, up from $154.3 million the year before. Before the pandemic, in fiscal year 2019, it carried 20 million vehicles southbound and brought in $146.4 million. During the pandemic low in fiscal years 20 to 21, that fell to 13.4 million vehicles and $108 $2.35 million, a swing of roughly 26% in a single crossing's income, driven by nothing except how many people needed to drive that day. New York's Bridges and Tunnels Authority, which runs 9 crossings, collected a record $2.4 billion in toll revenue in 2023 alone. And when New York City introduced congestion pricing into Manhattan in January of 2025, charging drivers a flat fee just to enter the zone below 60th Street, it collected $518 million net in under a year, on track to clear $550 million against an original target of $500 million a year for the Transit Authority. Here's the part of this business that flips the naive assumption on its head. Dynamic pricing on an express lane isn't actually designed to squeeze the maximum possible toll out of every driver. The stated goal of Virginia's I-66 express lanes, for example, is to hold traffic at a steady 55 miles per hour, and the toll, which has run anywhere from under $1 to a record $47.25, is just the lever that makes that happen. Revenue is the byproduct, not the target. You can see the same principle in New York's congestion pricing, which reduced vehicle entries into the tolled zone by roughly 27 million a year and still hit its revenue goal, meaning the system is working exactly as designed when fewer people choose to pay, not more. There's a second layer to this that surprises people just as much. Public infrastructure sold off through these long-term concessions very often ends up owned not by American investors, but by foreign pension funds. The Chicago Skyway is today owned by a group of Canadian pension funds. The Indiana Toll Road was run for years by a Spanish-Australian consortium before being resold to an Australian investment manager for $5.725 billion in 2015. And the original Chicago Skyway deal itself was resold in 2016 for $2.8 billion, nearly $1 billion more than the $1.83 billion the winning bidder paid just 11 years earlier, suggesting the city that sold it in the first place priced its own asset far too cheaply. Now let's talk about what happens when the traffic model behind one of these deals turns out to be wrong. The Indiana Toll Road Concession Company paid $3.8 billion in 2006 for 75 years of toll rights and filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in September of 2014 after a recession crushed the truck traffic its entire financial model depended on. It was resold a year later for $5.725 billion without a single day of service interruption, proof that the road itself was never the problem, only the original math. The South Bay Expressway outside San Diego opened in 2007, just as the recession hit, saddling the project with roughly $40 million in construction litigation on top of a federal loan that grew from $140 million to $170 million in accumulated interest before the operator filed for bankruptcy in March of 2010. It was eventually sold to a public transportation agency. In Texas, the Camino Colombia Toll Road was built for $85 to $90 million on a bet that trucking traffic from NAFTA would flood across the border in numbers that simply never arrived. It defaulted on $75 million in loans and was sold at a foreclosure auction for just $12 million, a fraction of what it cost to build. And the Dulles Greenway in Virginia, still privately owned today, blew through its own budget from a projected $146 million to an actual $315 million, while real traffic in 2022 sat at around 37,000 vehicles a day against a projection of 87,000 by 2010. It defaulted on its loans within 3 years of opening and is still fighting the state's utility commission over toll rate increases decades later. So if you do decide to build or buy a toll bridge, remember the one thing that actually determines whether you succeed. It was never really about how many lanes you could fit across the water. The bridge was never the product. It was the traffic model built decades before the first car ever paid to cross it. And when that model turns out to be wrong, no toll booth in the world, electronic or otherwise, can collect its way out of the math.